And again, right, if you're thinking about it from like a layman's perspective, like your API kind of to you means like that flexibility and that all encompassing. We can talk to you over here, and over here versus just like a canned, you're going to plug it in and that's it. And then if you have something else, you're going to plug in something else. So maybe we got 80% on one system, but then we're going to plug it in over here. We've got 18% over here. But we still have this 2% delta. But when you're kind of thinking from an API perspective, it's like circular and you can cover that 100% of everything that you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're all trying to find.
And it's kind of owning the technology too, of that communication, right? So that, for a number of ways, it's also the back end, right? So I'm communicating with all these systems. I'm owning the technology that's connecting to whatever it is. So number one, I'm kind of owning the workflow that happens. So if I need to customize that workflow somehow, I can do that, in-house. Secondarily, it's like, okay, also, yes, you want as many things as you can to live in an ERP. But you also have to have that kind of back-end reporting, because sometimes the reporting you can pull out of an ERP isn't complete. It doesn't give, like Judy, for instance, what she needs in order to comply, right? And it also doesn't give the business visibility into what happened in order to be audit proof, right? So that was also actually going back to one of your earlier questions. That was another kind of thing. It was like, okay, what were the big problems we saw when people got audited? And it was like, I didn't have any visibility into my data. And it took me forever to just like get simple reports to go, this is, this is what we did. And then the auditor usually doesn't stop at like, this is what you did. It's usually like, well, why did you do that? Right. So having the visibility into why was just as important. Right. So that was one of the things we always saw, even in our previous, company, which we were proud of, thought it was, best product in market at the time. It was like, okay, well, if you had to dig into it, we didn't really know why. And even just like investigating things like overrides, exemptions, rules, right? So maybe you're like, okay, this is taxable in this way, but I need to make a rule that every time I see this customer number and this product number in this location, I need to cite it to this particular spot because there's a reason for it, right? There's a reason like, okay, I sold it to customer A whose headquarters is in, Wichita, but the guy who's using it is in New York, right? So I need to make a rule that every time I see this transaction that I'm sourcing some of it to this user over here. So just things like that. But then visibility into the rules, because what happens, what we see a lot, what we used to see all the time, especially when they're converting products, right? It's like, okay, well, you're getting this result. We're getting this result. Why? And they're like, we don't know. We did an override. Well, who did the override? We don't know. Well, why'd they do the override? We don't know, because that person quit, right? 2 years ago.
Totally.
2 years ago, and they have no idea what Jane in 2004 did or why she did. They just hard coded the change, or they did, oh, we have an override module. Okay, great, we override it. You got to know like who override it, when they override it, why they override it, what was the difference, what was the outcome, like, because if you do get audited, you don't just go, I don't know, Jane did it in 2002. You got to go, well, Jane did it because our taxability changed because we added this product line, or we added shipping, or we included this, things like that. So that was one of the things, again, it's just like, creating that transparency. And like, again, that goes where the APIs also come into, as opposed to like the connector. Connector basically enables tax inside the ERP, if you think about it that way, right? Which is great. Don't get me wrong. It's great. But, again, owning more of that communication than being able to interact all over the place, via like more of a, an API, it allows us to be able to, also house all that data. So if you do have limitations in your ERP as far as what you can get out, I've got it, right? So when Judy calls me and says, I'm representing somebody in an audit, I need to know why this happened. I need to know what happened in New York City. I need to know why. I can not only give her what happened in New York City, but why. And, I can even run, what if scenarios. Well, if you'd have done it this way, you'd have come up with this, right? Even just like taxability, right? That was another thing. Is again, going back to the module thing. It's like, you might get a tax back and you go, why'd you get this tax? Well, because it's SaaS. Okay, great. And then they go, well, but a lot of people are like, well, we don't think that's applicable. Why is that applicable? Well, there's no exposure, right? So you'd either have to buy another module, right? Or buy a tool. There was a company out there called, right, that had a, had a
Hmm.
tool, and all
Yep.
all it basically did was just look up taxability.
Yep.
Um, or you submit a support ticket and wait for like weeks as far as saying like, why did you apply SAS to this particular
Correct.
module when it's downloadable
Correct.
software, making something
Hmm.
up, right? But
Yeah.
um, so even that, so we're like, we wanted to expose the taxability also and say, okay, we used, here's the definition that we used for your product. Does that match? And then here are the statute and regs we use. It says in, Colorado, this applies.
So that expertise between the choice and the application is super important. And then, it's interesting about sales tax software. I don't think they tell you this, but by default, it's taxable. If you have Nexus and you don't map a product to a category, it's going to default to taxable. We've had
Right.
clients override the taxability. Why? They don't even know. So we have a Pennsylvania audit issue of $500,000 for a client that didn't collect the tax, didn't even think about it. Now we're fighting it when it's questionably taxable. It isn't 100% right or wrong, but it's like, is that the way you want to do business, to have to fight? Just tax it or think about it. But what they did is they just took it away. So this interesting, they didn't even understand what that meant. Does
Yeah.
that make sense? They didn't understand when they added a new product code what they should do with it. So they just overrode it. And then they got in trouble later. So that's not fun because whoever overrode it's no longer with the company.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just that sort of stuff is super
And
important. I
we see
agree with
that
you
we
100%.
see that in every size company. I mean, that's the thing.
All over.
This is not
Totally.
like exclusive. I mean, there are
No.
really large companies have massive tax teams, and they're probably the worst, honestly, because
Uh-huh.
there's so many people in there, and there's so many kind of cooks in the kitchen, if you will, that
Yep.
if there's no traceability onto again why somebody did something, um, it's an issue, and
Well, you
that
have
goes
people.
back to the other part right, about multiple disjointed systems. It's like
Yeah.
because you might make a change in this system, but this division over here didn't make that same change.
Mm-mm.
You
It's
know,
not an institutional awareness
yeah,
around tax.
no,
I
a
can
lot of
remember it
times, no,
going out and we get at the table and IT's making a change. We're like, wait a minute, what are you going to do about tax? And we get involved to advocate for that because the IT is just like, I just want to connect it. I need to pull all this historical data into this new system and make it all work. And it's like, but you need to make sure you can take that next step too, because those are the duties you have. And the IT is like, they're like, I got historical, I got new, and then I can't deal with any of that other stuff in
yeah,
the middle. And I'm like, it's funny because they're smart tech people. They understand data, but if you don't
absolutely.
insert yourself in that process as a tax or finance or accounting person and speak that language, you miss the boat. We
That
find
Well,
that
and
a
actually,
lot.
it's not even tech people who are making those decisions.
well,
What
No.
we find
so
often
that
that
goes
it's
back to your
sales.
very first question, right?
Sales.
The
Yeah,
very first
It's
part of
sales.
like,
salespeople where they're like, I'm gonna get this sale. I'm gonna,
Mhm.
yeah, oh, you need 20 more users? No problem. Here's the same code. I'm gonna add 20. It's a different SKU and it's not
Yeah,
mapped. Because what does sales want to do? Right? Companies don't exist without sales,
right. They want to
right?
close the deal.
But
yeah,
they are constantly adding things without this kind of the next step
The
of
thought about
what
what
that
it
means.
impact is. Yeah.
yeah,
We have a client that, they put everything under a parent, have a bunch of Shopify entities, and everything's registered at the parent, but there's no way to remit or collect tax at the parent. And it's not even an operating entity. Like people don't understand how to get licensed. They don't understand how to integrate things. What is legally a structure isn't actually sales tax a structure. There's just, let's pull together a bunch of different businesses with different systems and then throw it all together and call it a brand, but there's a physical FEIN related or a legal entity with each one. I mean, people don't always think like you can't just roll things up for business purposes and go to market and not consider the operational issues and the legal
right.
issues. And there's a huge disconnect between those within tech and legal and private equity buying up different brands to assimilate to a concept and having all those entities. And that's also the problem with large multinational companies. They acquire people,
Yeah,
content,
absolutely.
clients, and they don't integrate into the system. And I always laugh because we would have all this, a lot of, we worked with BlackRock and all kind of the big PVE at Deloitte, and they were always on it. Like they made sure they got sales tax compliance, state tax compliance. So I love that because they understood that and they valued it because they knew there was legacy issues. So they always get everything cleaned up. But it's such work on the people who are still there to operationally manage all the different systems because they
Right,
don't talk to each other.
right.
So,
Well, and all these companies, right? IT is usually so overburdened with everything. So, that goes. So, and the tax team is, I mean, not to be, hopefully this is
Small.
not offensive to everybody out there, but they're always kind of like the Reddit stepchild in the back office or something that
Totally.
they just don't get the attention that they deserve,
Mm-mm.
because everybody's always playing offense, right? And they're not really thinking about defense. And it's like,
Yeah.
I can add all this revenue if I use my IT team to build this functionality. And
Mhm.
then that IT team's not available for the tax team when the tax team's laying in, hey, I got to connect 5 new systems over here just to remit tax.
To my
I got to
reporting.
have
Yeah.
IT resources. So that was one of the things too. Is like, how do we make it so IT light so
Yeah.
that, I don't have to have, Liz in the back office fighting, the sales team who wants to build some kind of cool new feature because they got a customer for it. And then she doesn't know how to, like, well, how do I get the sales tax data? How do I report on that? Because she's not getting IT to help. She's just not. I mean,
No.
we're like, that was, part of that. Is like, how do I make this so IT light that, we can actually enable them and allow them to kind of fight for the resources they need. But, one of the things that you were saying earlier kind of made me think back to the very first question was like, okay, well, what's different? Or like, when you built the software, what were you kind of considering, or what did that team look like? And we're talking about, yeah, technology people, but they have to have the tax background, they have tax knowledge to understand it. It's like, how many times, Judy, do you deal with companies where it's like the IT team comes in to talk about it? They don't understand tax at all, and like you're trying to get them to understand what it is you're trying to accomplish, and they're like, yeah, we'll do this and we'll do that, and they're like, no, 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 you don't understand. Like that's so it's like those are the people, you know, I can't hire them to build my technology, my tax technology. I gotta hire the IT guys. Like, yeah, I know exactly what this is because I've had to do this for my tax team before. So that was when we were hiring, we're like, yeah, obviously you want first class developers, but if we can find the leadership team, especially that has that kind of tax background, then when you build the
Yep.
foundation of the product, it's always going to be built on the foundation of tax.
Right. I mean, the internet has proliferated
Oh, of
growth
course.
and new
Sure,
ways of
sure.
doing business and new ways to connect to one another and to build your market bigger than your backyard. It's fantastic. So yeah, anyway.
Well, and I think that's the perfect transition to kind of as we wrap up, we always kind of like to end with a well, what's next, right? So looking ahead, how do you envision the future of sales tax automation evolving? And do you see any trends or innovations that like we should be watching for in the next year, other than maybe CereTax goes public and they're huge and you never have to do this again?
Yeah. So that's actually I'm going to play, I guess, the contrarian role a little bit here, and because most of the time people say, what's next, and you're always like AI and all these other kind of yeah, and yeah, I mean, obviously that's happening, and even like within our space, obviously, we're going to be using AI to make things more efficient. But I really see a trend in moving away from the fully automated solutions and more into the services solution, especially in the compliance space, because as companies are entering in and they are getting to a certain size, and they've tried the push a button and everything's automated for you, only to realize that, okay, well, no, there's actually some art to this.
Hmm.
And also it's like, especially like especially in kind of when you're tipping from the small to the mid market is where I really start to see that. I see going to that because they're like, okay, well, what's a notice? Why aren't my notices being filed? And like the fully automated solution is like, okay, I think it's working. I mean, I pushed a button and it said it filed the sales tax, but like I'm now getting, requests from this Secretary of State. I don't really understand this, or Department of Revenue. Um, it's just, there's this comfort level. And I honestly think I see more people moving back to, yes, you're going to automate parts, right? You're going to automate our side,
Hmm.
obviously. I mean, the tax calc has to be automated. Um,
Hmm.
and exemption certificate management, if you can automate that as best as you can, absolutely. That those are kind of table stakes automations that these companies are going to move into. But I really see a trend in those companies going, no, I really want someone like, you know, that I know is going to answer the phone call because I don't really understand this, and I want this comfort level that it's actually being done right,
Hmm.
and that I can get that support level. So we're seeing more like it's in the compliance space and the filing space and the consulting space and things like that. We see more trend towards like what I would call technology enabled services. So
Mm.
it's more around like Judy, in your firm actually being there, and people are like, as opposed to, the automated end to end, it's like automate up to here. But at this point, I got to have someone I can rely on. I see that as a trend on the sales tax automation side. The trend we see and what we're really trying to enable is how easily can I make it to where someone can convert one system to another system, whether it's
Mm.
one of my competitors to me, or whether it's, hey, how easily can I take 3 systems and change it all and connect it? So I think that's where the innovation and the invention is coming, is where like, okay, where is there that what is that tool that it doesn't take 2.5 years to convert, tax engines? Because I'm not getting what I want, but it's just too cumbersome. It's just too cumbersome to make the switch. So, what has to happen in order to trigger that event? And then what's the solution to make that easier? For 2 reasons. Number one, it's like to get you what you want, right? So new technology, but it's also so you're not held ransom for just increases upon increases upon increases. Because
Right.
if you don't
Right?
have
Not
that
finding
option to
comfort and
move quickly,
complacency.
It's
and I
totally
just
like
got my renewal and it's a 40%
it's
increase.
right.
What
Right.
and you go, I only got 60 days before my renewal. What am I going to do now? Right.
Yep.
I have to sign up. I have to
Yep.
renew. Right. So I think, and it's something we're investing in and heavily, is like, how do you make that to where you're not beholden to that anymore? You can go,
Mhm.
okay, my business didn't increase 40%. Why is your fee increasing 40%? By the way,
Correct.
I'm going to switch. And they can't go, then at the very least you got negotiating power, right?
Yep.
And I mean, huge enterprises, even, I mean, they're still spending millions of dollars for solutions that are out of date, and it's mainly because they're hostage. So
That's
I
correct.
think that's going to
Totally
be,
correct.
a big trend. And
Yep.
obviously, the big trends are always, vertical markets that change. I mean,
What do you mean
who thought
vertical? What do
about,
you mean by that?
well, like you and I were joking about it before the call, right? About like Blockbuster, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know, okay, you would put all this research into, the taxability of rental DVDs or whatever the case may
Yep.
be. No one saw streaming coming,
No,
right?
for
So
sure.
so that's what I'm saying, like vertical markets changing, right? I mean, the communication, even software as a service. Software as a service is a big one we see, especially because like a lot of the software as a service are things that enable like call centers and things that enable like customer service. Like, hey, we providing the software, it measures how much time Susie's on the phone with somebody and
Yep.
how satisfied they are, and we're tracking speech patterns. We're using AI to say, hey, every time these people call in, these are the problems, all those sorts of things. Well, quickly that software is becoming a communications product. And
Mhm.
communications taxes are a whole nother animal. So it's like, so we're seeing verticals change a lot, right? So,
Yes, that's so true.
and then
Yep.
as a vertical changes, it changes taxability of the products that you
Totally.
used to sell because you're
Yep.
delivering them in a new way.
Well, and I think that's the perfect place to kind of end it. And Brent, so we thank you so much for kind of being a little bit of a market disruptor and, giving our clients another option that's going to be flexible and nimble for them. So thank you so much for your time
Yeah, of course.
and spending your afternoon with us on the SALTovation podcast. We really appreciate it.
Awesome. It was fun.
Yeah, good.
All right. And that's another episode of SALTovation. Till next time.